A question and say who you are and where you're from, and then we'll send one of the roving mics, actually there is two, two roving mics, around to pick your question up. So just say who you are and where you're from, that would be helpful. Okay. Eric, do you want to start? Can I introduce Eric, actually? I said there was two NUS presidents. This is the NUS president from Sweden, so welcome. Let's give him a round of applause.
Thank you so much. Actually, I'm going to take the opportunity to ask two questions, one for Les and one for Andrew, or of course you all may, are very welcome to elaborate on them. First of all, this is a more general question, and you have to apologize if you have been, well, if you said something that implies an answer, but if that has gone over my head. But what types of are there, and in case there are, what types of national and structural incentives for higher education institutions are there to work with retention? Our experience is that, because we have a lot in Sweden, and out of the widening participation point of view, of course, there are many, well, actually counterproductive points of having strong structural incentives to work with retention. And that was mainly for Les, but because you were the one being closest to it when you spoke. And Andrew, you had a slide showing, in the beginning, showing the relevance of what you call policy incoherence out of the institution's perspective. Could you please elaborate on that, because, and how that is supposed to be understood? Thank you.
Right, let's pick up the second one first. Coherence or incoherence, Andrew. What was you kind of hinting at?
In terms of the survey, it was a fairly short survey, so what people were actually saying was that there's policy incoherence, but they weren't actually describing kind of what that policy coherence was. But they were very firmly linking that with lots of policy change. So if we look back over the last 10 years, there's been a lot of change. What a lot of people think was a very successful program called Aim Higher here, which was working with, as a kind of mainly an outreach type program, was finished. There was support for students in FE in particular, called the Educational Maintenance Allowance. That was finished. There are new support premium, the pupil premium in school, a new funding mechanism in higher education to take the place. So it's just that kind of rolling and changing of things coming out of the department.
Okay, thank you. Liz?
Thanks, Eric. Perhaps I can add something to that, because one of the pieces of incoherence that the people often raise to me is the fact that governments, at least in this country, often chase what appear to be contradictory targets at the same time. And the one that's most often raised with me when I visit universities is that we have a student number cap which no longer applies to students who achieve the highest grades in their school examinations. As a consequence of that, people have had their core numbers reduced so that there wasn't an explosion in student numbers. So people say to me that it's more difficult for them to push forward their access and widening participation policies because of this off-quota for students with higher grades, who most commonly come from the most advantaged groups in society. Over coffee, I'm sure people could explain to you a little bit more why those two policies seem to be working in opposition. And if there was somebody here from the government, they would tell you why they're actually part of a coherent whole. To go to your question about incentives, well, actually, strangely, there's a very strong incentive now in the new funding system. Because you've got a student number cap, the number of first-year students you can recruit is limited. Every student can pay you up to £9,000 a year in fees funded by the student loans company. So a student who drops out in the first term brings in no income to that university. One who stays there for all 3 years and completes a degree brings in £27,000. So just in terms of financial investment, there is now a very strong incentive for universities to invest in the success of their students. But people who work in education are not normally motivated by money or money alone. And I think that the major motivation why people work to see student success is because they actually treat students as individuals and they are concerned about the success of each and every one of their students. And the more evidence we build up as to what the barriers are to that success, then the more people can target and direct their activity in their extremely busy lives to those students who most need it.
Thank you. I think Nick's next. Wait till the mic comes. Here he comes. Yep.
Thank you. Nick Johnstone, Policy Advisor at Guild HE. Question for Les. Appreciated your talk, Les, and appreciated the reference particularly to dispelling the myth that HE isn't for the likes of everyone. I think that's really important. I wanted to concentrate on the macro and on funding in particular. Your overview slide on the goals of the national strategy mentioned two things around funding, efficiency and effectiveness in terms of improving targeting and effectiveness of funding and activity and reducing funding overlaps through collaboration and so on. Now, sector spending on access is a combination of institutional spending drawn from fee income and direct government funding drawn from provided to institutions by HEFCE. Now, we thought we were through a lot of the cuts until last week, but now it's been revealed that business is deeper in debt. This has been referred to by speakers. The debt is deeper than we had assumed, and some reports are suggesting that cuts will need to be made during this and the next Parliament. This and the next Parliament, so that's next year, of somewhere in the tune of around $1 billion or more. Given that revelation, can we be sure there'll be any funding directed to institutions at all in future? And if there will be, how quickly might we expect it to be cut? And if the prospect of cuts is imminent, what should access practitioners do about that?
Okay. There's several layers to that question, as you've worked out, there's no doubt.
Yes. Yes. I need to stress that I'm an independent regulator. Those of you who know my views when I was free to give them openly will know that I'm a very strong advocate of investment in higher education and therefore I have to be careful. I mean, clearly government departments like universities or colleges have a budget within which to work and business, I know, trying hard to work within the budget that they've agreed with the Treasury, hence the touch on the tiller that was announced last week. I think clearly there was there was a mini spending review that took us up to the general election, and in that mini spending review there were further cuts to be sought within the Higher Education Funding Council for England budget, and they were, I think, sensibly not specified, but we should not, those of us who believe in widening participation and access, who believe that the Student Opportunity Fund and things like Disabled Students Allowance and other things which we believe are very important to the work that goes on in universities in widening participation. If you believe that, you should be shouting about how useful that money is, demonstrating how well and effectively it is spent. Of course, we've moved into a different world now where the majority of money that goes towards widening participation and access now comes from institutions themselves. The amount of money that you receive from the Higher Education Funding Council for England is now smaller than the amount of money that institutions tell us at offer anyway they're using from their own resources on widening participation and access. Now, that's not altogether a bad world because I used to say when I was the Vice-Chancellor, stop top slicing the money I receive. I know better how to spend that money to achieve the mission and objectives of the university. And again, I think it's up to colleagues to argue within their own institution the importance of the widening participation and access activity that they do to target the money efficiently and effectively, and to demonstrate to their Vice-Chancellor and the powers that be that this is money which is spent particularly effectively, because that's where the majority of money is coming from. And universities ought to be able to direct that spend better than a central government can to achieve the mission of that university.
Thank you. Next question, Joan. I think you're next. The mic's coming round.
Joan O'Mahony, Higher Education Academy, leading on retention and success. Really enjoyed Janet's points about the Robbins report, and I was at the LSE for the celebration of the 50th anniversary of Robbins' publication. And it has been marvellous to see the expansion of education, that education, universities and colleges have opened their doors to so many people. But despite that, and despite that expansion, we still see very little social transformation, that the same class inequalities have reproduced themselves over the years. With the exception of gender, the guys at the top in the professions are largely drawn from the elite groups in our society. And I wonder, with the audience present who work so hard to widen access into universities and to include students both in secondary schools and in their learning experiences, what are we actually doing to make sure that those students can actually get into the higher echelons of our society? You know, what do we say and what do we do with the legal professions to say you have to, you can recruit a student not necessarily from Oxford or Cambridge? And I sometimes feel surprised that we're not more angry about that. You know, what are we actually doing and saying to the employers' organisations to make sure that all the work we do really makes a difference? Because unless we do that, we're not going to be able to explain to parents and students what education is for.
Okay, thanks, Janet. Janet, do you want to have a crack at one?
Yeah. Thank you very much. Okay, I think there is a lot of noise, in a sense, over-emphatic noise about recruitment into certain professions, because civil servants, the law, as you mentioned, journalism recruit very strongly from elite institutions. So I think there is actually a much, much more balanced picture across the, across the piece if you start to talk about other areas of employment. But a lot of the noise and a lot, I accept absolutely, of the power is concentrated in very few hands. Now, I think that higher education institutions do a lot. I'm of the view that higher education is a good thing per se. Widening access is not about getting that one lad from Sunderland into an ancient university. It's about raising everybody's aspiration, encouraging participation in higher education, encouraging people to take alternative routes into different kinds of employment. But I do think that one of the hardest nuts to crack is something that we need to talk more about in order to kind of name and shame. So employers who take a lot of graduates who do their first sift by A-level. So does that mean that higher education isn't important at all? So accountancy firms with 3 initials that begin with P and end in C, who get so many applications, it's too hard. It's too hard to look at the kind of achievements that people have, the strides they've made when they're in higher education, and then they complain that they're too posh to photocopy. So if you were to bring in a few people who actually probably messed up their A-levels and then went to university in their 20s and did brilliantly well, and they're really hungry to succeed and want to do well, then you might have a few people who say, well, I can actually work that machine, but I can also do more interesting things, and I know that I can advance quickly in an organisation. But if you only recruit in particular lazy, very lazy ways, and you only recruit people like us, and you segment the workforce, and the positions of power become even more consolidated in very few hands. I'll stop there.
Thank you, Janet. I think there's a question there. Just if you bring that mic down. Oh, you got it. Good.
Faye Croft, University of the West of England. My question is more practitioner focused. There's been a lot of comment about the challenges of information, advice and guidance, particularly in the schools sector, schools and colleges sector. Although over the last 2 years, since the significant changes in funding, our experience at UWE has been that the schools are making provision, however flawed it might be. And we have a tradition of working through our outreach programmes, of providing particularly information and advice. But my question to the panel is, what's your advice about what should we be doing about IAG moving forward? Because it is such a critical area. What's the responsibility of universities?
Okay, Les?
Well, look, it's very easy in the whole of this debate to say the problems with the schools, and indeed those of us in education, of course, know that every problem in the country is the fault of the schools, and the teachers in particular. I just think we do have to get involved and say that this is somewhere where universities can help. The most successful operations that I see are where there's genuine partnership between the university and the schools. The least successful are the ones where the university comes in and says, we know what you want, and roll out a programme of advice without consulting with the schools about what they see as the issues and what they want. It's of course as much the cultural issue as it is the fact that universities may or may not know what people want. But I think we can play a very key role in information, advice and guidance, and I hope that we can re-establish some collaborative structures which will reassure schools that they're genuinely in partnership with universities on this, and that universities are in partnership together. We're not in there marketing our own university, at least before the age of 16. We're actually in there talking to young people about a range of opportunities which are theirs, and indeed there are opportunities other than university. It's just that we believe that everybody who has the potential to benefit from university should have that opportunity, and we're putting information in there and inspiration in there, I think as well. That's something that universities can do and should be doing.
Okay, Janet, a quick answer, because I'm keen to get one more question in if we can before we
I
break.
mean, one of my roles is to chair the Higher Education Public Information Steering Group, and we are working very hard to try and promulgate the availability of the key information set and the Unistats website. I know it's not the sexiest kind of title in the world, but nevertheless, I think there is a lot of work going on in the sector to try to make sure that students know that they can get access to the information that, the 2,000 students who Oakley Staffordshire worked with when we came up with the list that comprises the key information set, the information that they want to see in the place they want to see it. And so we are, I'll confine myself to that, but the thing that's going on at the moment is the review of NSS. And so the new NSS will roll out some point after 2015, 16 or 17. And we have to make sure again that we keep an eye on the fact that it is used at the moment to provide information for students who are applying, as well as information for students who are, subject to the improvements that can be brought about through use of the NSS data.
Okay, thank you. Andrew, I'm sorry, I just want to take one more question and we'll finish, because I'm trying to get many questions in, so apologies, but maybe you can respond to Faye over coffee. Just one last question at the back, if it's quick.
Hi there, my name's Shelley Brindley. I work for the LSE. I look after their undergraduate law degree, and I work with our current students from a WP background. I was also formerly a secondary English teacher, and I'm a postgraduate part-time master's student for another Russell Group university. I wanted to get your thoughts about subject diversity with the WP agenda. It seems that it's quite simple actually to put things in place for students who are going into law, accountancy, STEM subjects. What about those who want to go into the creative industries? I find that it's difficult, having been a secondary English teacher, to encourage students from these underprivileged backgrounds to do degrees in English or other subjects like this, because it's difficult for me to pinpoint actually where their return is for those exceptional fees.
Okay, I think Janet would be a good person to start with.
If I can
Given
speak
your
as a
academic
professor of English. Simple. You could become a Vice-Chancellor. Job done, what can I tell you? It's, I was talking, and indeed I was a fellow judge with Mary Curnock-Cook this summer just gone, on an essay competition about why I applied to HE, etc. And some of the most heartbreaking essays actually were from students in the humanities and indeed the social sciences, talking about the familial opposition to, I want to study history of art. You know, they all told me I was bonkers, how could I earn a living? We have to talk about graduateness. We have to talk about the flexibility of degree level study and all the attributes that come to a student through that level of higher learning. So that's the first thing. I do think we've got to work hard on and particularly in the discursive disciplines, on proving the worth of the degree. But I also don't want the discourse to be completely instrumental. You know, I was lucky enough to spend from the ages of 19 to 26 reading books, reading literature. You know, I never emerged from my room, more than twice a week during the Dickens term. So, it was fantastic. And so we should, what I said to my kids, and I hope that you say to young people you come across in any way, whatever, well, you're going to be at work for a long time. Take this opportunity to pursue the subject that you love. Don't be too instrumental. You can always go back later and do a professional qualification. Your employer will want to mess with your qualifications anyway. Very soon after I arrived at Brooks, I had a conversation with a young woman who was doing a joint degree in theology and hospitality management. I said, well, tell me how that works. Are you going to be in charge of Gideon Bibles? And she said, no, I want a job, but I love theology. And, she was absolutely purposeful in her choices. So it's about confidence, it's about choosing, it's about, those 3 years, it's a big chunk of your life. Choose something you're passionate about. And we have to keep saying that over and over again.
Okay, thank you, sorry. Very quick response, Les, do you want to make a comment on this?
It's a very real issue that students from disadvantaged backgrounds apply disproportionately for certain professions, and indeed law and medicine are amongst those, and that's part of the reason why they appear to have less success rate in terms of admission to university. And my whole experience is with students from disadvantaged backgrounds that the first question, the middle question, and the last question is about employment from the position. And in some sense, it's a tragedy that in trying to explain to people that this is a good investment, we've actually given the message that it is an investment. And there are many more advantages to higher education than just the better salary. There is a significantly better salary. Some areas it's even better than in others. But everybody has a graduate a premium. But above all, it's about doing something that you love and something that you enjoy. And of course, a first or a 2-1 in something you enjoy is better than a third in something which you don't enjoy, even in the employment market. So, it's a wonderful opportunity for young people. I think we just have to get the message to them that this is 3 years in which they can follow a passion, and it can lead to all kinds of places. And indeed, many graduate jobs don't specify the nature of the degree that is required.
Okay, thank you. Apologies for people who didn't get their questions. I'm sorry, we've only got limited time. I'm keen to make sure, talking about hospitality, that you get a refreshment break. Can I thank all our speakers, first of all, and also remind you, if you haven't done so, you need to sign up